I'm sure many of you remember exactly where you were on September 11, 2001. Two airplanes struck the World Trade Center. One hit the Pentagon, and a fourth was brought down by the heroes in Pennsylvania with the battle cry of "Let's roll." New York City and the world were under attack. I'm a paramedic, and that morning I was heading into New York City while everyone else was trying to get out. Sirens everywhere, smoke in the air, people running, and as they were running out, thousands of first responders were trying to get into Manhattan. Police officers, firefighters, paramedics, all trying to get in. And everyone had the same mission, and that was to save lives. And that day changed my life. Because I met a man named Steve Zackheim. Steve at that point owned the largest ambulance company in New York State. He had dozens of his ambulances that came in that day. And unfortunately, 14 of his personnel died when the towers collapsed. But what made Steve special wasn't the company. It was what he did with his airplane. You see, Steve owned a private jet. He owned a Learjet, a Lear 31, that he actually fitted with a stretcher and with oxygen. But he didn't use it for business travel. He was based in New York City. But Steve used it to help people. If someone needed to reach a hospital across the country, if a child needed a specialty treatment center, and if a family had no way to get there, Steve would send his plane. No questions asked. I was one of the paramedics who had the privilege to fly along on these trips, free of charge. And that was the first time that I saw aviation used not for luxury, not for convenience, but for purpose. Years later, Steve became sick with a 9/11 leukemia linked to his exposure at Ground Zero. You see, while I only spent one day there, Steve spent greater than 30 days as they were searching for people, for survivors, and for remains. And he said something to me that day that changed my life. When I met with him about 2 weeks before he passed away at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City, he said, "Take my jet." I said, "Steve, where am I going?" He goes, "No, take my jet and go change the world." And the truth is, I didn't take that jet. I wasn't prepared to become a 135 charter operator, but I did take that idea. The idea that aviation could solve problems that seemed impossible. And that idea became ParaFlight. It was a simple nuance of two words, paramedic and flight. When we started ParaFlight in 2014, we began with air ambulance missions. That was our goal, that was our mission. Transporting patients, moving medical teams, helping people reach hospitals across country and across the world. But those missions taught us something very important about aviation. When lives are involved, time behaves very differently. Every minute matters, every decision matters, and air ambulance led us deeper into the world of transplant medicine. I had a routine meeting at Montefiore Medical Center in New York City, thinking they were there to discuss medical transport. When they said, "Are you familiar with organ transplant? Can you handle an organ transplant team?" Now, I knew nothing about organ transplant, but I said, like everybody in Europe would say when you're presented with something, with an opportunity, and I said, absolutely, we can do transplant, because if we can move air ambulance teams with nurses and paramedics, then by all means, we can fly a jet with a transplant team. And eventually we started flying organs. We started with lungs. They went to heart, some livers and kidneys, and occasionally a pancreas. But when that started happening, something became very clear. That organ transport is where Part 135 aviation operates at its highest purpose. Because these missions demand everything the industry is capable of. Speed, precision, flexibility, trust, and above all, relationships with people such as you in this room. These missions don't happen weeks in advance or days in advance. They happen in hours, sometimes minutes. A donor is identified, a surgical window opens, sometimes multiple transplant teams have to mobilize. And suddenly, an aircraft or multiple aircraft from different regions have to be sourced. Crews have to be activated, routes evaluated, weather assessed, and compliance verified. And believe it or not, most of these calls come late at night, early in the morning, New Year's Eve, July 4th weekend. You know, a transplant surgeon once told me, he called me like at the end of June. He said, just be ready for July 4th. I said, July 4th? That's like 5 days away. And he said, Omar, as I'm sure you know, there's always a transplant on the 4th. And it could happen on Masters weekend, Super Bowl, where everything is slot limited and availability is depleted. When most of the world is asleep, but the transplant community is just getting started. Because that's when aviation becomes part of that transplant team. Around 2017, we faced a real dilemma. How do you source an aircraft within 2 to 4 hours in the middle of the night? You can start calling operators. I would sit sourcing Avinode, Air Charter Guide, Google, you name it, we were there. start searching databases, but it takes time. I would start to sweat 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. How are we going to find that aircraft? And organ transplant doesn't give you time. And I realized there had to be a better mousetrap. And we were determined to find it or build it. So we built something simple. And I had this epiphany one day. And I said, if Uber and Lyft can do it, so can we. So they have Toyota Camrys and SUVs. We're just going to do it with jets. So we needed to create a way to broadcast our mission across a network of operators in real time. Originally, it was called simple, organflights.com. Just like mattress.com, cars.com, our message would get through just with our name. I reached out to a friend of mine who built apps, and I said, I have this vision. I want to build an Uber, but I want to build it for private jets. And we limited it at that point to lights and mids, which is really what you utilize, sometimes an occasional turboprop, a King Air or PC-12. And we signed on about 40 operators over 2 years, but it was specific for transplant. And that system began teaching us something very powerful. When we had a heart, they needed to move from Anchorage, Alaska to Vancouver, British Columbia, which is actually pretty rare that you'll actually source it an organ that's going to go to a different country. It was April of 2023, and most sourcing tools in aviation start with the same assumption, that you have to look for aircraft that are based nearby. But aviation doesn't work like that. Aircraft move, crews are transient, operators reposition, and jets sit all over the country. So we need to be able to broadcast that mission. So we did it. And by that point, we had built our new platform called urgentflights.com. We leveraged the same technology that we used in organs, and we started to use it for urgent, where we can take not just lights and mids, now we can open it up to everybody. And we had everything from light pistons up to ultra long range and airliners. But broadcasting alone doesn't solve the problem, because what matters is who responds. And one aircraft immediately stood out. Anybody recognize that? That's True Aviation's Falcon 50. We broadcast our message, and Jeff Rubenstein called up. And he said, what do I got to do to get that trip? We're actually in Spokane, Washington at this point. Now, I was actually surprised because we actually used Jeff on that Falcon 50 2 days before to get retail clients over to Opelika. So we had no idea they were there. But he said, we just landed in Spokane. And they said they could reposition immediately into Anchorage. We just have to move that OR to 2 a.m. So the crew went into rest. That's actually what the aircraft flipped on the ground at 2 a.m. Interesting to note that because we went international, we had to do a customs declaration of the value of the cargo. Anyone want to venture a guess at what value we had to put for a heart?
0.
Good for you. What's your name? Jonathan, you're absolutely spot on, because you can never put a value on a heart. And that's actually what they put on the declaration. And that was 0. But thanks to their support, that heart crossed the border. And a transfer that may not have happened, and another life was saved. We had another story. We actually had an aircraft inbound from San Juan with a heart on board. It was just about 2 weeks ago. Mid-flight, if you guys recall, last Friday, BWIAD and DCA all shut down. No arrivals, no exceptions. But we were filed as a medevac. We were about an hour out with that heart. And the trip from San Juan to BWI is pretty long, pushing that window for the heart. We were filed as a medevac. We worked the phones, and we got an exemption clearance. We were the only aircraft that was allowed in. So that aircraft landed. The organ moved, and another life was saved. In urgent aviation, relationships, that's what many of the people that we call friends over here, beat databases. In addition to the platform that we utilize maybe 15% of the time, we have over 200 WhatsApp groups comprised of private clients, operators, and transplant centers. You guys know, when your phone buzzes at 2 a.m., we're probably looking for a flight. Where's Mikey? There you go, Mikey. Shout out to you too, out in PBI, South Florida. A recent story we had just about a year ago, Phoenix to New Orleans. There was an organ that was headed from Phoenix to Dallas. Organ was on board after takeoff. It wasn't our client, but the aircraft experienced a loss of pressure. Then emergency descent, emergency landing. They came back. The organ was on the ground. The surgical team was waiting. The clock is running. But we posted on our platform, and within minutes, we had a response. It was an aircraft that was based in Scottsdale. So we landed the crew, moved them over to Scottsdale by ambulance, and they took off, and we were able to save that lung. It didn't pay to reposition, so that's what we did, and we completed that mission. Story that happened just about 2 weeks ago. Shout out to the Encore team right there. Oklahoma City, tornado. The hospital went into lockdown in the middle of that OR, and after they completed it, we were able to fly out. Because to protect the mission, everything pauses, but nothing is canceled. So you hold the aircraft, you adjust the timeline, and you wait for that window. And we held cross clamp until the tornado cleared. And then that heart went back to San Antonio. You have to think fast, because in aviation, you never assume that nothing will go wrong. On the contrary, you build systems assuming that something will. Contingency is part of the mission. And sometimes the challenge isn't the aircraft, it's the environment around it. We had a mission where an organ needed to move across a dense metropolitan area immediately. Driving through traffic just takes too long. Waiting for a jet crew call out would take long too. So we launched a 24 helicopter operator based in New York City. They lifted immediately. They bypassed city traffic, landed on the hospital helipad, and delivered the organ to a waiting jet outside the city, minutes instead of hours. Part 135 aviation becomes incredibly powerful when you unlock its creativity. Jets, turboprops, helicopters, ground transport, related solutions. This industry has far more capability than most people realize. Working in transplant logistics revealed something remarkable. The organ industry doesn't just challenge aviation. It unlocked the true potential of Part 135. So we began developing new operating models, hot standby aircraft, primarily lungs, liver, kidney, and pancreas, when decisions have to be made intra. If an organ will be accepted, liver biopsies, kidney function, EVLP, which is ex vivo lung perfusion. So we have aircraft pre-positioned and ready to launch the moment a mission is accepted. Hearts and lungs pre-positioned because we don't have that window. But livers and kidney generally stand by on a base with about an hour plus or minus for repo. Once we get cross-clamp or the aorta is clamped, the clock starts, irrelevant of weather or any other factors that may make a play. 4 hours for hearts, 6 hours for lungs, up to 10 hours for livers, and up to 24 hours for kidneys. Same day, multiple stop missions. Hospitals are now moving surgeons, not just organs. Many hospitals can't afford to keep a full-time transplant team on there, so they're using physicians and surgeons all over the country. When a call comes in, they'll hire them separately, but we have to send a jet to go pick them up. We had a trip a little while back. Surgeon 1 was in Kansas City, Surgeon 2 in St. Louis. The procurement is in Oklahoma City, and the transplant location is in Louisiana in the Panhandle. One aircraft, multiple pickups, time-critical sequencing. All completed within that 14-hour crew duty window, and both surgeons have to go back home. However, some missions actually don't work on a single tail. The distance is too wide. Timing doesn't line up. You lose hours waiting or repositioning, so you split the mission. One aircraft for the transplant team, a second aircraft for the organ. They move in parallel, different routes, different timelines, aligned to the same outcome of saving lives. The organs keep moving, and the surgeons aren't held in place. They complete the transplant, and now back in their hometowns that same day, ready for their next mission. It's not just efficiency, it's availability, ready for that next call. So working in transplant logistics forced a different level of coordination. Real-time communication between dispatchers, operators, and transplant teams. It pushed how we communicate, how we execute, and how quickly decisions get made. And in the process, it brought operators across the industry closer together. Over time, we saw the same friction points appear. Information scattered across systems, operator sourcing fragmented, and manual compliance checks burning the time that doesn't exist in ASAT missions. So we built a coordination system we wished existed. And that became, as I mentioned before, urgentflights.com. Not a marketplace, a coordination engine. Technology designed specifically for urgent aviation, 0 to about 48 hours out. The system helps surface real operator availability, intelligently route mission requests, score viable aircraft options, and continuously monitor compliance. It reduces noise so our coordinators can focus on the execution. We embrace automation, we embrace data, but in aviation, technology doesn't replace relationships, it amplifies them. Because Part 135 aviation still runs on trust. Most of our operators, their dispatchers, and their crews become our friends, and we treat them that way. On transplant missions, we make sure that our crews are taken care of. Meals coordinated for each trip, not just for the passengers, but for the crews too. And we do that for 2 reasons. 1, it's a nice thing. It's a nice thing to feed your crews. But more importantly, we want to make sure that those crews don't leave the airport. We need those pilots standing by. We can't take a chance that an Uber doesn't show up, a rental or a loaner car from the FBO gets a flat tire, or there's traffic, or an accident on the road. Something that we have to be prepared for, so we take care of all of that. Not because it's operationally convenient, but because they're showing up for something that matters. And when operators trust you, they show up. They show up faster, they respond clear, and they execute better when it counts. I can tell you from the operators that we work with in this room, a simple WhatsApp message and we book an aircraft. I don't think we've signed a contract with you since day one. I think we signed contract on our first trip, and we've probably done hundreds of missions with you guys. Shout out to Encore Jet and to Mikey and all the operators here. When we give you our word, it's our bond. So over time, something interesting happened. Operators started to call us. They understood our domain was ASAP, and we began supplementing their fleets. When they had an AOG, but they just needed additional aircraft. Think holiday season. If somebody has 3 or 4 aircraft and they have 6 requests, they have a choice. They could send their clients elsewhere. They might sign up at another operator, or they could remain as that buffer. So they call us. We source the aircraft. Nobody has any idea where it came from. And now we just hand over those quotes to them. They saw the system working. They saw our missions being coordinated faster, and they wanted to participate. And at the same time, something interesting started happening. New types of urgent missions began appearing. Laboratory tests during COVID, plasma, stem cells. They needed to move immediately. Emergency medical equipment to different regions. ASAP transport for legal teams. They needed to be in the right courtroom at the right time. We received a call during COVID from a law firm that had offices in Atlanta, New York City, and Dallas. They had a deposition that was set for Houston on a Monday morning. And on the Sunday evening, right before, the attorney who was working locally, who was supposed to do that deposition, came down with COVID. There was no way that they could reschedule that deposition. So they called us. And we launched an aircraft from New York City, and we got them there just in time for that deposition. Human remains repatriations. War broke out on February 28th. We had an aircraft that was we were supposed to pick up a human body. Unfortunately, it was tragically killed in a car accident in New Zealand. They had to get to Tel Aviv. It was scheduled to depart March 1st. We required round-the-clock management. We had a Gulfstream G550 that was all set. And the night before, they went to war. The skies in Israel shut down. We had to reposition that aircraft instead of landing in Tel Aviv. Then they had to do a stop in Singapore. And they ended up going into Egypt, and we arranged for grounds to take that body from Egypt to Israel for burial. We were doing emergency pet transport for families in crisis. Government movements that couldn't wait. Think of all those tornadoes, hurricanes, disasters, things that take place when you don't have time and you need to be able to move teams. Corporate emergencies triggered by cyber attacks when they need to send their engineering team down to the data center. AOG recoveries when an entire operation is standing still. You have to move passengers who are stuck somewhere, parts, pilots, avionics, you name it. So different missions, different industries, different reasons, but the same urgency. And something became very clear. The discipline required to move a heart at 2 a.m. works for any urgent mission. 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. Friday night or Tuesday afternoon. New Year's Day or a random Monday in August. Well, let me say something clearly. Organ transport remains the heartbeat of our organization. It's our North Star. It shaped our discipline, it shaped our culture, and it shaped our relationships with operators across the industry. The transplant community taught us something. It taught us what excellence looks like. And the Part 135 operators in this room make those missions possible. Today, we're proud to announce UrgentFlights.com version number 2. Built from the lessons learned through transplant logistics, built to support operators, built to bring clarity to urgent missions. Today, that system sits on top of a network of more than 400 operators, representing thousands of Part 135 aircraft nationwide. Behind it is a team of analysts continuously monitoring, qualifying, and onboarding operators in real time. At no charge to the operators. It's a free database and a dedicated engineering team focused on improving the platform daily, maintaining compliance and deploying automation that removes friction from every single mission. Built to expand this framework beyond transplant, supporting corporate emergencies, Part 91 and 135 operations, AOG recoveries, remote operations, air ambulance, emergency evacuations. Because urgent aviation isn't just a niche, it's a category. And it's a category that was built at 2 a.m. Everyone in this room has a role in that future. Operators, flight departments, dispatchers, brokers, vendors. We all have that something in common. At some point, we received a call that changed everything. And a solution is mandated right now. A call that came in late at night, a call where someone was depending on us. Those calls often come in at 2 a.m. And when they do, the systems we've built, the relationships we've formed, the trust that we've earned across this industry, that's what makes the difference. The transplant community shows us what urgent aviation can become. operators across this country proved what Part 135 is capable of. And together we've learned something really important. When aviation moves with purpose, when operators, dispatchers, coordinators, and flight crews move together, lives change. Organ Transport didn't just shape our company, it helped shape the future of urgent aviation. And if it works at 2 a.m., it works anywhere. So we need you all, whether you need a solution or you are the solution. We invite you to be part of the urgentflights.com network. So when that call comes, you're already in the system. And when you're the one in a bind, we have your back with ASAP options. Thank you.